I saw that today because I had to write down a sheet. I didn't realize it was a church business. Nobody told me.
We should have. Well, we thought you would watch the Sunday service and announcements.
Thank you for there.
Yes. No. All right. Very good. Let's transition now to the Bible study here. We'll be in Luke chapter 21. We've been working our way through different passages talking about Israel and their future, kind of in conjunction with our Sunday morning study, talking about God's plans for the Jewish people. And so we're looking. Oh, what?
Did you start?
Yes, it's going. Yes, sometimes. No, we're good. We've been talking about God's work with the Jewish people. We looked in Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9 talks about Daniel's 70 weeks. It prophesies how 69 weeks are going to come before the Messiah Prince comes, before the Messiah comes. And then it talks about after his coming, there's a verse in there that talks about how he will be cut off. The city and the sanctuary will be destroyed. And then it talks about the 70th week beginning when a covenant is made with the Jewish people for peace. That covenant is for 7 years, and halfway through the Antichrist, the one that they made this covenant of peace, will break the covenant, raise up the abomination of desolation, and then there will be persecution throughout the remainder of the time. And so that's Daniel chapter 9. And so we looked at that. Then a couple of weeks ago, we looked at Matthew chapter 24. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus and the disciples are coming out of the temple. The disciples are amazed by the temple, and they're looking around at the temple and the temple structure, and they're trying to point out how amazing it is to Jesus. Jesus says that don't be amazed by these things. There's not going to be one stone left upon top of another. It's all going to be torn down. That generates some questions. They ask him, well, when is this going to happen? When are these things going to be? And they ask, what is going to be the sign of your coming, and when are you going to establish the kingdom? And so the questions are twofold. It's not just about the destruction of the temple, it's about the establishment of the kingdom as well. And we can assume, again, when we have passages like that, understand that we probably don't have all of the words that were spoken at that time. We maybe don't have all of the questions, and maybe even just a summary of the questions that were asked. So this was the nature of the questions that were being asked. When's the temple going to be destroyed? When are you going to come? What are going to be the signs of your coming? And so Jesus gets into an explanation there. He begins with a warning. The most important thing there is the warning. Don't be deceived. Don't let anybody deceive you about my coming again. And that begins his sermon, that ends his sermon. Okay, there's going to be a lot of false ideas, false deception. Don't let anybody deceive you. And so the main thing, there's that warning about deception about his coming. He talks about there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. Don't let wars and rumors of wars get you bothered. That's part of history. That's part of what happens with mankind. There's always going to be wars. There's always going to be rumors of wars. That doesn't mean that I'm coming. Then he talks about a major war. Nation shall rise against nation. And so he talks about earthquakes in different places. And he says, this is the beginning of sorrows. And so it talks about a special type of war. It talks about a war that's different than the other wars and rumors of wars. And it comes with all of these different ecological disasters and things that happen. And so that becomes more of the sign of things beginning to take shape here. A lot of people interpret that to be the world wars. I don't know for sure about that, but a lot of people interpret that to be the world wars. Then he talks about, in Matthew chapter 24, he talks about the time of the Gentiles, the gospel of Jesus Christ going throughout all nations of the world, and the testimony of the kingdom being spread throughout all the world. And then he says, after that, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel will take place. And then he goes into a description of the abomination of desolation, and he says that when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, very specific words, It is standing up in the holy place. Again, we understand based on several passages that the abomination of desolation is not the destruction of the temple, but it is an idol in the temple. And it's when the Antichrist is worshiped as God in the temple of God, trying to present himself as God. And that's in Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. So he talks about he says, when you see the abomination of desolation, run, just go, and there's going to be incredible persecution. And then he says that persecution will continue. If he'd not shortened the days, nobody would survive. And then he says, after the persecution of those days, don't let anybody deceive you. They'll come again, false Christ. They'll say, well, Christ is here, Christ is there, Christ is in the wilderness, come out here. He says, don't let anybody deceive you. Again, deception, not being deceived, is the main aspect of his sermon. He says, my coming will be in the clouds with great signs and wonders, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. And that is what will end this, when they see Jesus Christ coming in the clouds. And again, that's important. A lot of people want to make Matthew chapter 24 in those passages about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so they're going to say that Matthew chapter 24 is about 70, happened in 70 AD when Titus, the emperor, came through and destroyed the temple and destroyed Jerusalem. And so some of those things, they're going to interpret the abomination of desolation as the destruction of the temple. They're going to take that whole concept of seeing Christ in the clouds more figuratively. They'll point to Stephen saying, well, I see Jesus in the clouds, as he's passing away there. And I see Christ seated at the right hand of God. And they're going to say, Christ started his kingdom in 70 AD with the beginning of the church and so on and so forth. But it's very specific. They shall see the Son of Man. And it's not just the believers and somebody like Stephen who's having a vision. It's the world seeing Christ coming in the clouds. So that brings us to Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21 is going to be the same time. It's going to be some of the same questions, but I'm going to propose to you tonight that Luke chapter 21 covers some different material. It uses the same language, but Luke chapter 21 is actually about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. And though it's very similar, there's going to be enough in here to help us understand that Luke is not talking about the same thing that Matthew's talking about. Matthew talks about the abomination of desolation, and it culminates in the coming of Christ in the clouds, in the beginning of the kingdom. Luke chapter 21 is going to talk about the destruction of the temple, and it's very important because those that want to make Matthew 21 or 24 about the destruction of the temple are going to use this passage and say, here, this is clearly about the destruction of Jerusalem, therefore so is Matthew chapter 24. So let's look at this, and this does give us some insight into the future events and the things that we see happening here. So Luke chapter 21, beginning in verse 5, says this, and as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations, he said, these things which you see, the day will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. So they asked him, saying, Teacher, but when will these things be, and what will be, and what sign will there be when these things are about to take place? And so again, we have that same situation. We have Jesus and the disciples. They're pointing out the temple and the wonder and the beauty of the temple. Jesus says it's all going to be thrown down. Not one stone will be left upon another. And they say, well, teacher, when are these things going to happen? And what's the sign that these things are about to take place? And notice Luke's focus is on the destruction of the temple. And that's going to be Luke's focus. When Matthew writes, he writes with a different focus. And I think he emphasizes different aspects. And there's no reason to believe that Christ didn't talk about both of these things at the same time. It's just Matthew records a different aspect of what Christ said on that day. Again, when we have sermons, when we have statements, we don't have everything that was said all the time. Okay, you look at Peter's sermon in Acts chapter 2. Do we believe that on the day of Pentecost, Peter preached about a 2-minute sermon? No, no preacher worth his salt would preach two minutes with 5,000 people there. Yeah, no. So yeah, but what we have is a summary.
Well, and it says that if everything was recorded, Jesus said the books couldn't contain it.
Yes, yeah, the books could not be written to contain it. So again, just because Luke has a different focus, and therefore I think is going to give us some different material than Matthew gave, that should not be a problem for us.
No, when two people see the same thing, they see different things.
Mhm.
That's what happened.
Yeah, and yeah, but I think they're both recording accurately what Jesus said. It's just that, but this is what stood out to him and what he is concerned about. So, yeah. So they ask him, and he's going to be focused on the temple and the destruction of the temple. And so he gives a similar warning, verses 8 and 9. And Jesus said to them, verse 8, take heed that you do not be deceived. And again, deception is a major aspect of what Christ is. Don't let people deceive you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and that the time has drawn near. Therefore, do not go after them. But when you hear of wars and commotions, don't be terrified, for these things must come to pass first, and the end will not come immediately. And so there's that whole idea. There's wars, and there's always going to be wars and commotions of wars, and there's always going to be rumors of wars. And these things are always going to take place and happen. That's just part of life. That's part of world history. And so don't let every conversation and every war among mankind get you all excited or get you all nervous. But he gives, again, that warning about deception. It becomes very easy to be deceived during times of war, during times of great commotion. People are very susceptible to deception. And so he says, but don't let that bother you. Don't let that get you going. Verse 10 through 11, he talks about an unusual war with ecological disasters taking place. Verse 10, then he said to them, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And there will be great earthquakes in various places, famine and pestilence, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. And so this, actually, verses 10 and 11 make me think that world wars are not the wars that are talked about here. Because here he talks about also the earthquakes and the famine and the fearful sights and the signs from heaven. And so it sounds like more that this is something that takes place during the tribulation. And we do have a war that is consistently talked about in the Bible, the war with Gog and Magog and all of these nations, this confederacy of nations coming against Israel. I would say that is probably the war that's talked about. When you see that war take place and all of this commotion going on, then you know the end is near. That's going to be the sign. And so that's my interpretation currently, my best understanding, given these passages and what's said. So he's probably talking about things that are at the beginning of the tribulation, is it before the rapture, after the rapture? Is the church going to be here for this aspect of these things? I don't know. But he talks about a special war with all these ecological disasters taking place with signs in heaven and fearful sights. And so that's going to begin things. So don't let normal wars and normal problems and everyday fighting and killing, don't let that get you all bothered. It's when you see these things happen that it is the beginning. And then in verses 12 through 24, he talks about things that are going to come before. And so he's given us insight into the future, but then he goes back, and the next 12 verses are going to be about things that happen before the end. And so he begins verse 12, but before all these things. So remember in Matthew was talking about what was building up to the end. The abomination of desolation, then an incredible persecution that ended with the sky splitting open and Christ coming in great power and establishing his kingdom. Okay, That's what Matthew spells out for us there. But here he says, before these things, before the end happens, before the war comes, before the earthquake and the pestilence and all these things, before all these things, they will lay hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. But it will turn out for you as an occasion for a testimony. You're going to be persecuted, but it will be an opportunity for you to be a witness to the truth. Therefore, settle in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives, friends, and they will put some of you to death. But you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But not a hair of your head shall be lost. By your patience, possess your souls. And so he talks about this time. And remember, he says, before all these things, before the end. So don't let commotions and normal wars and things like that bother you. And you're going to be persecuted. And that's what happens before the end. And these are not indications that the end is near necessarily. Increased persecution in the United States of America of Christians is not necessarily an indication that the end has come. Wars is not necessarily an indication that the end has come. And so, but he says these things happen before the end. So increased persecution. And then he talks about, then he goes into the destruction of Jerusalem. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that the destruction of Jerusalem is near. Now, we're looking at some different things here. In Matthew 24, it's the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place that is supposed to cause you to run. Here it is Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, and you know that the destruction of Jerusalem is near. Remember, if we go back to Daniel chapter 9, after the 69th week, the Messiah is going to be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that is going to come is going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. And that happens between the 69th and 70th week. It's very specific. And then in the 70th week, something different happens. There's a peace agreement, and there's the abomination of desolation. So Luke is describing the destruction of Jerusalem that is announced by Daniel after the 69th week. Matthew is talking about the abomination of desolation that happens within the 70th week. And so he says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that the destruction of the city of Jerusalem is near. And again, so he is talking about different events. Then and he's going to use some similar language as what he uses in Matthew 24. In the two events, there's quite a bit of similarity between the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by Emperor Titus. Josephus records that in the horrors of what the Romans did to the Jewish people when they came through and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. And it was terrible, terrible wickedness. The death, the destruction, what they did. And so it's very similar to the persecution of the tribulation. And he says to do some of the same things. But don't let the similar language, the things that are similar, take away from what is different here. So verse 21, then let those who are in Judea flee into the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. And so he says, run, flee, just like he says in Matthew. It is interesting that they say that a lot of Christians survived the destruction of Jerusalem and temple because of this passage. They saw Jerusalem surrounded by armies and they fled. The Jewish people, those that were dedicated Jews, they stayed and they fought. We're told that they were holding out really well against the Romans. They were fighting really good until they were able to get the temple on fire. And once the Romans were able to start the temple on fire, the Jews stopped fighting and tried to put out the fire. And they focused their attention on putting out the fire, and the Romans just came in and slaughtered them. But those that were Christians understood this is the end. This is the destruction of Jerusalem. It's prophesied, and they got out of town. Verse 22, and people will point to verse 22 and says, "For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled." And they say, see, it says that all things that are written are going to be fulfilled. Therefore, this is the last dealing God has with the Jewish people. This is his final judgment. And therefore, we shouldn't look for any more for the Jewish people past this time period. But it doesn't say that this is going to fulfill all things. It says that this is done so that all things might be fulfilled. So this contributes to all things being fulfilled, and this has to happen in order for all things to be fulfilled. This isn't the fulfillment of all the prophecies. This is, but this is done, and so this is, like I said, a lot of prophecies. This was done so that it might be fulfilled, or so that Christ said, "I need to be baptized to fulfill all righteousness." This is part of fulfilling righteousness. This is part of fulfilling all things. And so that verse does not have to mean that this is the final judgment. And so he continues there, verse 23, "But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people." And so the focus there of judgment upon the Jewish people. "And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations." Now notice again the end. Matthew chapter 24, what is the end? The skies open up. Jesus Christ comes in his great power. He judges the nations of the world. He calls the birds of the air to gather together to eat the flesh. The angels come and gather his people from all the four corners of the earth. That's the end there in Matthew chapter 24. Here, the end is that the city of Jerusalem is destroyed. The people are judged. Many fall by the sword, and the rest are led away captive into all nations, just like the prophecies throughout, beginning in Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Jeremiah. The Jewish people are going to go into dispersion, having been judged. And then it continues, "And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled." And so he speaks about the time of the Gentiles. And what is the time of the Gentiles here? Now in Matthew, we talked about the gospel going out to all nations. But here, the time of the Gentiles is the time that the Gentiles have control of Jerusalem. The time that the Jews are in dispersion and the Gentiles have control of Jerusalem. You say, has that ended? Well, kind of, but kind of not. The Jews really don't have control of Jerusalem fully. They don't have control of the Temple Mount. I would say that we're still under the time when the Gentiles are trampling Jerusalem underfoot, though there are a number of Jews that have returned. But again, there's a different end. It's leading to a different conclusion. And you got to make some very big jumps in interpretation to take Matthew chapter 24 and fit it with Luke chapter 21. And the best understanding is that they're just simply speaking about different events. And so Luke gives us some different instruction, different teaching that Matthew doesn't give us because of a different emphasis here. But those who wish to make Matthew 24 about 70 AD will point to this passage, and it would be very compelling except for a few things. Daniel speaks of the destruction of the city and the temple as something different than the abomination of desolations. That happens, the destruction of the temple and the city happens by the people of the prince that will come, not the prince himself, but the people of the prince that will come. It talks about it before the 70 weeks. 2 Thessalonians tells us exactly what the abomination of desolation is. And again, there are those that want to take Daniel and apply it to Antiochus Epiphanes, but Antiochus Epiphanes came, 200 years before Jesus. I think he foreshadows for us the Antichrist. He foreshadows for us the abomination of desolations. And what did Antiochus Epiphanes do? He didn't destroy the temple. He went into the temple and offered a pig on the altar. He brought an abomination into the sanctuary. And 2 Thessalonians tells us that's what the Antichrist is going to do someday, not destroy it, but rededicate it to the worship of himself. And so again, the best understanding is that they use similar language at times to describe two different events. Luke chapter 24 is talking about the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the beginning of that time of dispersion for the Jewish people and the beginning of evangelism and outreach to the nations of the world. Matthew chapter 24 is looking forward to that end time, again, and both very consistent with Daniel's prophecy of how things are going to go. And so this will be the beginning of the captivity of the Jews and the beginning of the times of Gentiles will have control of Jerusalem. And this will be the beginning of that time of the Gentiles. And again, you kind of take all of this back into Romans chapter 11. What's he talking about in Romans chapter 11? God turning away from the Jewish people, turning towards and grafting in the Gentile people, but understanding that this is not a permanent. He can graft back in the Jewish people. And the Romans passage there, saying that he will someday, there will come a deliverer out of Zion to drive away ungodliness from Jacob. And so this eventual salvation of the Jewish people as the time of the Gentiles ends. And so then in verses 25 through 28, he gets back to end times. So verses 12 through 24 talk about before all these things take place. Then 25, he says, there will be signs in the sun and in the moon and the stars, and on the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing for fear, and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. And when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your head, because your redemption draws nigh. And so after all these things, after the time of the Gentiles, after the dispersion of the Jews, after the time of the Gentiles trample underfoot the city in Jerusalem, then you'll see the sign of the coming. And so 25 to 28 mirrors the end of Matthew chapter 24 there, or that prophecy in Matthew chapter 24. And so we see kind of the end here of things. But again, very specific as to what that sign is. It's the Son of Man coming in the clouds, and they will see. The idea is the whole world will see. Some people, again, try and make this happen in the early days of the church. And Stephen says, I see the Son of Man seated on the right hand of God. So he saw the heaven split, and he saw the Son of Man in heaven. And so that's when these things happened. But the world sees this. So, any comments, questions?
Is that the all millennial?
So there's the ones that would say that, they would be post-millennial. So post-millennialists believe that Christ's kingdom is in the church and it's already been established, and that the church is Christ's kingdom on the earth, and that we're supposed to, and so that they would say really that the kingdom kind of begins in 70 AD. It kind of begins with the church, and that the church through preaching and teaching is going to overtake, the governments of the world, and eventually
Will get better and better.
Yeah, better and better. And then there will be a time, though, when we have such control of the governments of the world that the kingdom officially begins. And so that, at that level of actually blessing the earth to that degree. And so they would be the ones that would say that in 70 AD. Yeah. And so I think a lot of amillennialists would have some similar interpretations, though they would, they wouldn't have the tribulation things. They would just say that when Christ comes, that's the end. There's no millennial kingdom. It's just eternity begins.
They don't do that 1,000 years.
They don't do the 1,000 years. That's amillennial means no, kind of. Yeah, there is no millennium.
No millennium.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I I've been confused by these passages because he starts with future things and then he goes back to verse 12, he goes back to
Yes.
other things, and then at the end, he goes back to the other end.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yep, yeah.
That's what makes it hard.
Mhm. But I think if you kind of follow it through there, he says, here's, these things, don't get worried about them. But then there's this war, nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and all of these earthquakes. And so this is kind of the beginning of the end. Then he takes that parentheses and says, but before these things, and then he walks us through that for those 12 verses, and then he jumps back to it and says, no, and then the signs come.
Then when
And
you get to 27, it goes clear to when Christ comes.
And so,
And then he goes to a fig tree. Now, what's
Yeah.
that all about?
well, and so again, the post-millennial people will take that fig tree and say, see, that's talking about the kingdom. And so the kingdom started, in 70 AD, it's going to grow slowly, and then it's going to bud into the kingdom. And so that's how they're going to, I mean, if that's what the rest of the scripture taught, that'd be a pretty good passage to indicate that. Look at the fig tree and all the trees when they're already budding, but see and know for yourselves that summer is now. Oh, well, actually, okay, this isn't the passage I was thinking of. There is that passage about the seed being planted, it growing up, and then being a big tree eventually. But I think our interpretation, I mean, we understand that the people that are being saved today are going to be part of the kingdom. So in a sense, we can't say we're building the kingdom because everybody who's saved today is going to be in the kingdom. And so,
Which kingdom are you talking
well, the
about?
millennial kingdom, yeah, we'll all be in the millennial
Come
kingdom.
back.
Yeah. But we just understand, they understand it as we preach the gospel and the kingdom begins. And they probably, most of them don't believe in a resurrection before that millennium begins. So you and I, unless we're alive when it begins, will not enjoy that kingdom.
We see the rapture and then we come back.
Yeah. And so they would not have the idea of a rapture or a resurrection before that kingdom began.
Yeah, there's a difference.
Yeah. So anyway. All right. Any other comments, questions?
We're not any more confused than we were.
No, yeah.
Remember it for 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, Revelation would be, it's spiritualized, just talking about wars and things, different spiritual battles and things like that. But they would not see that as actual events. And there are variations with some, you can't put everybody into one box. So, but most postmillennialists would just see the next thing is Christ coming back and we begin eternity. There's no tribulation. And then so all of those things are just kind of things that happen in heaven. They're descriptive language of things that have happened on earth, but and give various interpretations, but they won't actually think of like Revelations as actually happening. And then again, that Daniel 70 weeks, it kind of concluded there with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD, that was kind of the conclusion of Daniel's 70 weeks.
What I feel for is to be a Jew right now, but their eyes are darkened.
Yes.
They don't understand what we see ahead. I wouldn't want to be a Jew right now.
Yeah.
If I understood all that.
Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But Jewish people, if they understand, can be saved and be part of the church. So,
Then they should be.
yeah.
But the Jews now that have all gone back to Jerusalem and Israel now are pitiful people because they go back and they're living in poverty because it's a poor life.
Yeah. There's a lot of rough stuff there. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
because they go back with nothing,
Mhm.
what they can carry with them. And Israel government is spending all of their money for defense.
Mhm.
So they aren't giving anything to these poor people that are Starved.
Yeah.
starving, they
Yeah.
have no life.
Hmm.
And yet they're in promised land, so I suppose
Yeah.
that makes.
I don't know much about the situation. I guess I don't.
Well, I
haven't kept
see
up the-
things,
Yeah, the people in the Jews currently in the land. what
yeah,
it's like for
and they're really in bad shape.
them. Oh, very good. All right, well, what do we have about prayers items tonight then?
Praise the Lord, that Dwayne's knee replacement went well, so the doctor said
Dwayne's knee replacement went well.
he will need physical therapy, and he went in not being able to walk, so he needs to do that, and
Okay.
October his daughter gets married, and he wants to be able to walk down the aisle, so.
Yeah, okay.
So,
And it'll work, it'll
Mhm.
take some rehabilitation though.
All right, so pray for Dwayne. Surgery went well. Would like to get to the point, be able to walk his daughter down the aisle when she gets married. So keep him in our prayers. Continue to pray for Jerry. Wanted to be here tonight, but was unable. So just continues to struggle there.
Is he just getting weaker?
Yeah.
As the
Yeah.
days go by?
So pray for Jerry. Mark Welch is struggling, and so he's got some appointments and things going on there. But anyway, pray for Mark Welch. Health needs there. What's that? Roger. I don't know if I know Roger's last name. Roger, not Denley, but the other Roger that goes around the wheelchair.
Drake.
Drake, thank you.
That's his last name.
yes,
Possible cancer, so we'll be praying for him. He reached out to us. So pray for Roger. Yes, Rick Boley passed away,
really.
so pray for the Boley family. Continue to pray for the family that lost a teenage daughter over the weekend. And,
To, like, suicide?
no, car accident.
Okay.
Yeah.
Laura had her little brother in class this year.
Okay, okay, wow, yeah. Well, Michaela Mertens knew the family pretty well. So,
She was, there was a whole page about her in the
Yeah.
paper today.
mhm,
And she was known by everybody in school, of course, and
Yeah.
they liked her, and like us, they had the whole page.
Yeah.
All about her and things she did in school
Yeah.
and what the people, how they liked her.
so, yeah, tremendous loss there, obviously, so, young life. So. The family hurting, so keep them in our prayers. We got camp next week. Pray for camp and our campers and our staff and everybody involved. Look forward to a good week of camp.
Dwayne Smith, he's still missing his mother. And I would say he is a believer, so he needs prayer anytime anyone has an opportunity to witness to him, he's,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say seeking, but he's thought about all of this.
Pray for Dwayne Smith, spiritually, emotionally at this time, his needs there.
A couple months ago, we were praying for my coworker who had the tumor in
Yes.
his sinuses. He got the tumor removed, and they found out today that they weren't able to remove the whole tumor because it was so big.
Okay,
They thought if they removed the whole thing, it would like possibly kill him from
Okay.
inflammation. But it sounds like there's a high possibility that it's growing back,
oh my,
and he might have to have another surgery.
okay.
His name's Gerald.
So Kylie's coworker Gerald, tumor removed, but not able to get it all, and so another surgery. Okay,
Clay and Laura are officially released to start deputation.
yeah. Clay and,
Travels ahead.
yeah, Clay and Laura are officially on deputation with Send, right? And so
Who's there?
Send or is it Send International or just Send? I don't know. Okay. Anyway, Send,
That's who's,
yeah, sending them. Send is sending.
Agency.
I haven't heard of it, so I don't know what to put down.
Pray for Clay and Laura as
That's a
they.
little baby.
I'll let you shake your head, but that's perfect.
No problem, there,
She-
they didn't say,
I know, she just outgrew it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I was wondering.
How's Alan doing? Has he just been gone or is he?
Yeah, I think he's out of town from
Okay.
what Jerry said. Yeah, but I need to, yeah, I haven't got a health update
He's
from
in the
him.
Colfax at the other house, somebody said.
Yeah.
Sunday.
So,
There's a young fella here amongst us getting married pretty soon.
yeah, pray for Clay and Laura. I was thinking Johnson, different Johnson. Caleb and Kinsey as they prepare for marriage.
Isn't that Johnson?
Yeah, it's Johnson.
Yeah.
Week and a half or 2.5 weeks. Yeah. So wedding coming up. Still got a baby coming. Pray for the baby and Kylie and Jaden. And yeah. Continue to pray for our vehicle situation. We appreciate greatly the church's help there. The van did finally die completely Monday. I think it's done for. So we are looking at a small car and then hopefully get our other vehicle soon. So
I will say, it is wonderful how God works. I was on my way to a doctor's appointment in Cedar Rapids when it died. And the Lord allowed me to get to Casey's parking lot. And when I got to the parking lot, I got a call from the doctor saying, I don't think you really need to come in. We could just do a phone consult if you want. And I was laughing. I had to explain to my the Lord just worked it out.
so
You're on your way.
And Caleb Johnson has a car trailer and so he'll pick it up.
Yep.
And take your towing process.
yeah, so it worked out very nicely. But yeah, continue to pray for that. We appreciate your prayers in that regard. So, other items tonight. Pray for my shoulder. What's happening there? Hope I don't have to have surgery. Anything else tonight?
Pray for Evan.
Evan, yes. Pray for Evan Longnecker.
Doesn't have a lot more. I mean, he's working some, he's drawing, but he's still numb with his knees down. and
Okay.
Messed up with his hands, and so he's, there's a new chiropractor, I think that she's doing a lot of good, and he's doing physical therapy, and I don't know his age before he would do something different, but he's stopped having, headaches or, no, dizziness.
Okay. Cool.
And so there's been some positive in, this first and throughout.
Yeah, absolutely.
He sounds good. He sounds hopeful. I was afraid it was, no, he sounds good.
Good. All right, so continue to pray for Evan. He's still got some recovery to take place, but is doing well. So.
And Brenda had private monitoring today.
Yeah. Michael's aunt had part of her lung removed, so pray for her as she recovers from that surgery. Anything else tonight? Yes. Yeah, so pray for the message of VBS continue to resonate in hearts and minds of kids and families. We had a good group here Sunday, so. I think after Sunday, I'm going to kind of shut down the teen question and answer time leash on Sundays, though there's still interest there. So pray for that, those opportunities there. And then we have the lady Judy that's been coming to our coffee shop Bible study from the community, and I just really appreciate her interest in Bible study there and things. Let's go ahead and divide up for prayer this evening.